We were really delighted to invite Sarah to keynote this event. First met Sarah a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, when we did our Evolving Forest event, and I believe maybe she's going to talk a little bit about the seeds of the work that she's doing now. And I'm delighted to have you with us, Sarah, and your beautiful cats, and please take the stage.
Sorry, did you say take the stage?
Please go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. 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 Wow. Okay. So thank you everybody for your patience, and welcome to my talk. I think we're all feeling a little flustered, but I'm probably quite calm compared to everyone who has been working on the tech. So thank you everybody for managing all of that. This kind of thing is not surprising when I give a talk. So weird things happen with the tech and the energies. So let's begin by just all of us taking a few breaths together to bring ourselves out of the flurry of activity and back into our bodies and into this session. So we'll just take some breaths, maybe 3 to connect. Nice, thank you. And I'd like to invite you in your own way, as I speak, to join me in acknowledging the land and the first peoples that were living on the land where you are. And I would like to acknowledge with great gratitude the land and the elements in and of themselves, and for the ways that they sustain all life on the planet, including our human lives. And I'd like to give special thanks to trees and their vast intelligence, aligning with I'm aligning with plant scientist Stefano Mancuso's comment that trees are extraordinary beings in every respect. You do not become the primary source of a planet's life by chance. I'm beaming into you, I'm beaming in with you from Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan, Canada, the homelands of the Nehiyawak, or the Cree, the Anishinaabeg, the Saulteaux, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota peoples, and the Métis nations. I'm gratefully living as a guest here in Regina, the city of Regina, as a 3rd, 4th, and 5th generation settler descendant, having grown up in unceded Native territory in southwestern Quebec and Treaty 5 territory in Alberta. I want to say a big thanks to everyone for the creation of sentient performativities. And it's wonderful to have a little exchange and meeting, and big thanks to Richard Poval, Manud Sambika Poleros, Kat Redford, and everyone on the organizing and technical teams doing amazing jobs, and probably sleeping with the thousands of emails, dreaming of emails that you've been receiving. It is truly an exciting honor for me to be sharing my doctorate research with you today. And thank you so much for this opportunity to share it with everyone at the conference. And I also want to just say that it's really wonderful timing for me to share my work after Nita Little's talk yesterday about relationality and mindful co-presencing. It's a really nice space for my work, and you will be referencing much of what she said yesterday. And I was also delighted to learn that Nita would be giving a keynote, because it reminded me of my own 10 years of contact dance in the Toronto community with John Osborne. And that was another chapter of my life that I actually miss very much. Okay, so we are heading into my screen share. Okay, great. Okay, so the focus of my talk on interspecies communication and collaboration is mostly with plants and trees while being inclusive of other non-humans. My talk is based in research from my doctorate, which I completed last year and continue to grow with. I'll give a little history and outline aspects of my research design, theoretical frameworks, methods, findings, and discussions in relation to interspecies communication and collaboration. Interspecies communication involves subtle, somatic, body-based practices, experiences, and ways of being, sensing, knowing, and moving in the world that support respectful, empathetic, equitable relations on the part of humans with the earth and all beings who live here. As we all know, this is a crucial time in our human history in relationship with the earth. We need to step into more active and, quoting Manu from her welcome address yesterday, more felt planetary stewardship. I'll speak for about 35 minutes and we'll have some time for comments and questions. The images in my presentation are mostly from my research. When I began my research regarding the sentient relationality of trees in early 2015, there was little material that resonated with my inquiry for an ethnography of trees. Forest ecologist Suzanne Simard's understandings of the wood wide web, the immense subterranean network of mutually beneficial connections between fungi, known as mycorrhiza, and microscopic ends of tree roots, through which trees support each other via communicative transfers of sugar, minerals, and water, was an important start. Anthropologist Natasha Meyer's study of plant scientists' relationships with the plants involved in their research was also informative, particularly the scientists' resistance to acknowledging the intelligent aliveness of plants because doing so could jeopardize their career. Michael Marder, a prominent philosopher in the area of agency and rights, in the area of plant agency and rights, and one of my committee members, told me that when he released his first piece on plants in 2007, there was very little published in this area from Western perspectives. 8 years later, by 2015, he said something new came out pretty much daily via writing, podcasts, film, and other media. From my experience, 2016 marked a large public and academic outflow of research and enthusiasm for the complex inner and communal worlds of trees and plants, beyond traditional views of botany, forestry, and sustainability that consider the vegetal world as indifferent and insensate, as Marder puts it, as biomechanical objects in existence as resources for human well-being and progress. Now, in June 2022, we're attending this amazing conference called Sentient Performativities. Several presentations and workshops use language in their titles that was not very common when I began my career just 7 years ago. Sorry, not my career, my research. Language that explicitly recognizes and encourages awareness of plant and non-human agency. Agency meaning their abilities to affect their lives and surroundings. A few such titles are included in this slide. Each year, worldwide momentum grows for respectful interaction with our vegetal and more than human relations. 3 years ago, in June 2019, I participated in the interdisciplinary Evolving the Forest conference held here at Dartington Estate, hosted by Art.Earth, along with the Royal Forestry Society and Timber Strategies, and largely attended by traditionally minded foresters. For the single session on sentience and ethics, my tree talk, also based in my doctoral research, followed woodland guardian and writer Simon Leadbeater's critical review of science-based literature and speculation as to the possibility that recent discoveries of tree interrelations could, quote, rekindle our ancient sense of reverence for the trees themselves and their sacred groves, end quote. Conference delegates had mixed reception to our topics, including the sentiment that there is, quote, more sentience in my belly than a tree. Needless to say, Simon and I were very nervous in lead up to our talks. Yet, to our great and joyful surprise, approximately 70 people attended the Sentience and Ethics session, apparently almost triple the audience for a concurrent session on the direction of UK forestry over the next 100 years. An immediate palpable energy rippled through the room with some attendees later commented on as I offered an acknowledgement of the land, much like the way I began my talk today. This gesture of communication, respect, recognition, relation, and reciprocity had not been explicitly offered during the conference by any of the delegates whose work and life depend on land, trees, and forests. The energy in the room was viscerally electric, open, and stirred with emotions of joy, confirmation, remorse, excitement, curiosity, and connection. Simon's and my talks became a conference sensation because tree sentience and tree human communication challenge conventional thinking, are emotionally and spiritually moving, and offer new ways of understanding and being in the world for people educated in the Western paradigm. Despite being taught otherwise, those of us raised in Western education systems are an inextricable part of the reality of interrelations that is fundamental to most indigenous and animist ways of knowing. This is my dissertation title. Tree Knowing, Ethnographic Encounters, Sensuous Scholarship, Relational Ontologies, and Environmental Empathy. In my interdisciplinary doctorate of social sciences focused on the sentient intelligence of trees as agentic, conscious entities with unique ontologies, perspectives, and lifeways, alive in ongoing relational interresponse and action within their communities. Sensuous scholarship is research that involves ways of knowing and representing research subjects with and through the body and the senses. In other words, somatically, and ontology is the philosophical consideration of the nature of being. My research inquiries and considerations were guided by ontological emergence theory, indigenous epistemologies, meaning ways of knowing, indigenous research methodologies, which are modes of inquiry, and public ethnography that was also multi-species ethnography. These were integrated with plant science, philosophies from the recent ontological and non-human turns, interspecies communication, and ethnographic film production. The core principle of ontological emergence theory, as Santos indicates, is that its relational view of reality does not merely mean that all things exist in a world of relations and are somehow interrelated to each other, but that their very existence, identity, and behavior are constructed and transformed by specific systems of interactions. Reme describes this as an unfolding process of becoming. O'Connor gives the example of the properties and behaviors of a tornado, whose components include dust, debris, microentities, climate, and weather conditions. These, he writes, likewise depend one way or another on the properties and interacting behaviors of the tornado's fundamental components. Yet the tornado's identity does not depend on any specific composing microentity or configuration, and its features and behaviors appear to differ in kind from those of its most basic constituents, end quote. Thus, a whole entity such as a tornado reflects the interdependent relations of unique and arising properties of which it is comprised, while the particular composition of the properties forming a tornado at a certain time and place is unique and arising unto itself. Ontological emergence corresponds with Ingold and Pálsson's concept of biosocial becoming, which takes the view that non-human and human life evolves equally and intrinsically through both biological and social influences that are mutually conditioning via emergent fluxes and exchanges in processes and relations. As such, Ingold writes, all creatures should be considered not as what they are, but what they do, not as beings, but as becomings, not as separate, disconnected, preformed entities, but as trajectories of movement and growth. Ontological emergence aligns with the reality of interrelations that is, as McClasson and Breton state, the most fundamental facet of Indigenous law. But there are also tensions within these two views of knowing the world, a major one being the pervasive colonial attitudes of disregard, stealth, and oppression of Indigenous knowledge systems by Western academics and academic systems. Indigenous knowledge systems and methodologies that developed through generations over millennia guide research in ways that are culturally respectful and interactive, and in interactive awareness and responsibility with and for natural law, the blueprints provided by nature of how to live well and all that is necessary to sustain all life, Mitchell writes. They are in direct relationship with the earth as a source of knowledge and meaning for human life and community, Cayete states. As Lavallee summarizes, with the caveat that knowledge systems of Indigenous peoples vary throughout the world and even within countries, quote, the relational nature of Indigenous epistemology acknowledges the interconnectedness of the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of individuals with all living things and with the earth, the star world, and the universe. Many Indigenous ways of knowing accept both the physical and the non-physical realms as reality. In accepting the non-physical, one must accept that reality cannot always be quantified, end quote. Many Indigenous knowledge systems recognize the personhood of non-humans and kinship between humans and non-humans. Regarding the vegetal world, Navajo elder Donald Hughes relays that plants are alive. You must give them a good talk. As McGregor and Plain share, our teachers include non-human forms such as animals, trees, waters, rocks, etc. They are our relatives, and we continue to learn and seek guidance from them, as we always have. End quote. Practices and experiences of intersubjective communication for many Indigenous peoples are fully integrated into and supported by culturally informed knowledge systems and locally specific protocols, write Barrett, Hines, Winchgarden, and Loverod, citing Indigenous scholars Deloria, Mitchell, and Watts. Ethnography, meaning writing culture, is traditionally involved in research about human culture. It is a methodology or framework of inquiry that involves particular methods, analysis, and written or meditated components of a study. As characteristic methods of ethnography, observation, participation, and interviews are engaged in situational, relational, durational, reflexive, iterative practices of interaction, interpretation, translation, and representation. Public ethnography is a relatively new research strategy. Its key elements include the sharing of academic knowledge with the public, often through arts-inspired means built into research project designs, and activism on the part of researchers to reduce social injustice and promote social awareness and cultural understanding. Although I did not focus on it specifically as such, my research involved multi-species ethnography through its ethics of care involving trees and other non-humans and practices to decenter my human self, to make space Although I did not focus on it specifically as such, my research involved multi-species ethnography, through its ethics of care involving trees and other non-human practices to decenter my human self, to make space for the perspectives and life ways of other than human beings. Multi-species ethnography entails, Van Duren, Kirksey, and Munster write, learning to be attentive to diverse ways of life and learning to live with others in entangled worlds of contingency, uncertainty, and co-constituency. As Leanne and Pálsson note, historically, ethnographic consideration of non-humans has been suppressed and sidelined by human-centered theoretical pursuits. In addition to these diverse approaches to knowledge making, I looked to recent plant science focusing on sentience, intelligence, consciousness, agency, perception, and communication in plants. In the late 1970s, plant scientist Anthony Chihuahuas put forward the controversial suggestion in a Western context of intelligence in plants based on his research into how plants perceive signals from their environment and how they interpret those signals, which result in changes in behavior. During our interview for my research, he said he realized that the signals and behavior which we easily associate with intelligent behavior in animals were effectively identical phenomena going on in plants, but coming out in a different, much slower way, demonstrating profiting from experience and capacity for problem solving. Oddly enough, he continued, the person who really started a lot of this off was Charles Darwin. For centuries, Mancuso writes, Eurocentric biologists and botanists had purposely avoided conceptualizing intelligent forms of plant behavior, trying by every means to safeguard the validity of time-honored categories of animals and plants. Although contention on the subjects of perception, intelligence, communication, sentience, and consciousness in plants remains prevalent, scientific research and public awareness of these phenomena have been accelerating over the past 4 decades. The non-human and ontological turns in academia have been gaining momentum, decentering the human in favor of a turn toward and concern for the non-human, including plants. The research focus on animals that has long preceded vegetal beings is changing. By 2017, science-based papers on plant research reached a 5-year average ratio of 1 to 2 compared to papers on animal research. So before I began my doctoral research, I knew nothing of these things. And the central focus of my doctorate, the sentient relationality of trees, was actually not my idea. It came from trees themselves. On a walk to campus one morning, in my second year of study, I encountered the phrase, quote, an ethnography of trees, as an experience of interspecies communication initiated by trees that I perceived suddenly, somatically, and simultaneously as voice and text energetically coming into my inner field of awareness from the left. It was very distinct from the usual felt experience of my own thinking. After 3 days of considering this idea for my research topic, I shared it with one of my professors. Of course, I thought he would think I was crazy. Instead, he enthusiastically supported the idea, telling me about the recent academic turns I just mentioned and their inclusion of plants. I had no idea of these things, and I knew little of interspecies communication, which I did not tell him about. As word spread on campus of my new dissertation topic, there was, to quote that professor, shock and awe. Some members of my doctoral community thought the topic was impossible and did not align with social science research, while others were supportive and excited. I trusted my experience of interspecies communication with the trees, but I needed and wanted to know more. So I made taking interspecies communication courses a part of my research design. In my research interviews, I asked my research participants about their experiences communicating with trees. This learning and my personal experiences became research findings that then became research methods I engaged to communicate with trees and to share with others. In turn, these methods produced more research findings. During my research, engaging with a single tree or animal alongside one or more people verified similar messages and understandings we each received. My research took place in 8 countries on 3 continents in English and Spanish and formed an international, mobile, multi-sided ethnographic inquiry. The field methods of my study consisted of attending 20 workshops and conferences, 20 formal interviews with 22 people who I came to know as tree knowers, visitations and communication with trees, embodied sensuous observation, inquiry, and reflection, working with film in these contexts, public and academic tree talks, informal conversations with people, and gestures of reciprocity, including offering tobacco. Offering tobacco is the beginning of a respectful relationship, while acceptance of tobacco acknowledges that a relationship has been formed. Aikenhead and Mitchell write, I offered tobacco to trees and human participants as a protocol associated with Indigenous methodologies, respect, and reciprocity. During my research period, I gave 12 public and academic presentations, 3 of which included leading participatory exercises on communicating with trees. Giving these tree talks, as I came to call them, was simultaneously a field method and research dissemination, which, as a goal of public ethnography, situated my research in interactive, emergent engagement with the public. As method, a key outcome of these talks was witnessing people have experiences of communications with trees for the first time, validating similar messaging received from trees among more than one person, and having strangers who attended, at least one person per talk, tell me they have had and or regularly communicate with trees and plants. These findings supported the metaphysical elements of my research. Through 7 in-depth workshops, personal experience, and discussions with formal and informal research participants, I learned about communication with trees, plants, land and sea animals, stones, water, insects, birds, and other organic and inorganic and non-physical beings, and Earth Mother herself. Based on this research, I have come to know methods of interspecies communication as embodied combinations of telepathic and intuitive processes that can be described generally as fluid, layered, subtle, and unique to each person's modes of intuitive perception and experience of communication, as well as the context of the non-human being connected with. In the case of trees, as Basha Alexander explains, even if you think you are experiencing your own thoughts, realize that the tree's intelligence is overlapping its messages with your individual sensory system. In other words, the tree communicates through the communication, intuition, and knowledge systems of the human it is communicating with. This personal uniqueness in humans makes it challenging to outline precise communication processes and experiences. The recipe consists of general guidance rather than exact steps and outcomes. Different teachers and practitioners have somewhat different approaches, some with specific instruction. I'm also remembering how in a workshop, Basha and Jim both said that if a message comes in that is really something that you would never think about, it's a good sign that it's coming from the trees or the tree and not an internal process. Human plant and human animal communication both start with important opening gestures. When we want to connect and communicate with a tree or other non-human, we introduce ourselves, ask for permission to connect, and let go if permission is denied, respecting if there is desire on the part of non-humans not to engage for privacy or other reasons. Think of greeting another human. It is invasive and rude to get in their face and feel them up. These initial greetings can be done, the initial respectful greetings can be done by tuning into a plant via the quiet spaciousness of our inner awareness, speaking or visualizing silently with heartful intention. In the case of a tree, we can place a hand softly on the trunk or stand further away, our feet above the tree's underground roots. Nature communicator Marko Bagajnik learned from a cedar to shake hands with a tree by standing with his back to the tree, raising his hand, open hand, high above his shoulder and extended back towards the tree. Guided meditations can also bring us into connection with non-humans, quietening our inner field of awareness, then stepping us into connection and direct communication. Plants and animals can be communicated with directly in person or through photographs, extending beyond space and time. While in person or from a distance, communication occurs via the bioenergetic space between and overlapping with what we humans perceive as bodies with boundaries, locked in space and time, or as Nita described yesterday, bodies as two-dimensional skin sacs that end at the edges. The key sensibility, regardless of approach, is quietening and opening our inner our inner selves before tuning into a non-human. Pagajnik explains this as opening our emotional consciousness, radiating love to create a bridge over which communication can flow. I'm going to read that again. Pagajnik explains this as opening our emotional consciousness, radiating love to create a bridge over which communication can flow. The worlds of trees have much more going on than humans think because we rarely pay intersomatic attention. Interspecies communicator Mary Gettin encourages people who are starting out with interspecies communication to use their imagination. This can help train our somatic and intuitive awareness muscles, and it aligns with Nita's encouragement regarding the importance and power of imagination to create reality. However, in interspecies communication, it is very important to allow for the reality of intercommunication experiences. They are real. I actually avoid fictional accounts of interspecies communication so as not to conflate them with real experiences. Usually, there is a sense of openness or welcomeness, a warmth or a sense of peace that indicates permission is granted and the non-human would like to connect with us in return. A speaking voice may also be heard, perhaps more in the case of animals than with plants, but this is dependent on the unique modes of perception in our inner intuitive field, as I came to call it. The mutual communication process may consist of actual verbal speaking within our human mental field of awareness, or messages arising through voice, text, vision, sound, scent, emotion, feeling, and knowing sensed within the body and intuitive fields. These intuitive somatic language forms can be present singly or in combination, such as simultaneously hearing words spoken and seeing matching text in my mind's eye, as happened for me when trees suggested my research topic. Excuse me a minute. For English speakers whose intuitive perceptions are based in language, for example, they will perceive messages in English. As Kulik echoes for communication with non-humans, the kind of language that interests linguists and psychologists is only a tiny band on a vastly broader spectrum of communication. Intuitive telepathic language encompasses images, smells, emotions, sensations, and feelings, phenomena that cannot be necessarily be put into words, end quote. This corresponds with Cayete's description of the inner sensibilities of humans, or the inner ear, which hears the subtle voice of nature in native science and knowing. In summary, I'll share Barrett, Hines, and Winchgarden's and Loverod's description of intuitive interspecies communication, or IIC for short, a term recently taken up in academia. Last month, I attended a multi-species methods conference focused on intuitive interspecies communication with over 200 people attending. Drawing on a diversity of intuitive capacities, they write, IIC includes the mutual exchange of visceral feelings, emotions, mental impressions, and thoughts, embodied sensations of touch, smell, taste, sound, as well as visuals in the mind's eye. While these exchanges can occur while in direct physical proximity to the animal or plant, they can also occur over great distances and without the need for visual, auditory, olfactory, voice, or other cues that humans normally associate with direct interactive communication. At the end of our communications with non-humans, it is important to close with respectful expressions of gratitude and farewell. A gesture of reciprocity respectfully acknowledges the time and exchange spent with non-humans. It can be offered in the moment to a tree or plant via a strand of hair or water, tobacco, widely used as a sign of thankfulness, Wagamese indicates in Ojibwe and other indigenous cultures, herbs of other traditions, and or through subsequent activism on behalf of non-humans. The practice of dieta is another mode of interspecies communication and is specific to plants. In a forthcoming journal article I am co-writing with plant geographer and community herbalist Alice McSherry, McSherry discusses her research with dieta, or dieting with plants, as an ethnographic practice to connect metaphysically with vegetal perspectives, cognition, and awareness. Dieta, in the context of Amazonian plant medicine practice, enables the cultivation of sacred relationship between a human person and a plant spirit. It is the process where a person enters a relational contract, usually ritualized, with the more than human world to participate in a co-becoming healing process that necessitates a direct participation with the more than human world. As Berlowitz et al. Write, dieta involves connection with plants through lengthy periods of social, behavioral, and alimentary restrictions while ingesting specially prepared plant substances. The interplay of the dietary conditions and plants ingested sensitizes the dieter to receive healing, strength, guidance, and knowledge. Communication during dieting practices can be experienced through the embodied and intuitive modes of perception I just described, as well as dreams. For her research, McSherry engaged a soft dieta to observe, interact, and relate to the vegetal beings whom she would learn from and then gratefully harvest to make medicine with. I'll share a few stories of experiences that emerged during my research. And I want to bring your attention back to ontological emergence, because details of interspecies of communication experiences are relationally emergent, biosocial, intersomatic, and collaborative. I've been talking about inner experiences of interspecies communication, but outer subtle messaging can occur in the vegetal world as well. During our interview for my research, Cree elder Doreen Spence shared a story that stands as a good rule of awareness when stepping into non-human territories. She had been asked by German acquaintances if she would take them into an Alberta forest. We got out of the car, she told me, and this guy puts his backpack on and he was going to go in. And I said to him, no, it's not our right just to walk into the forest and just do what we do. I said, no, you have to ask permission. And those trees just went still, like very still. And then as soon as I asked for permission, gave my offering, their little leaves started clapping, and they were just very happy that we asked permission to go into the forest, that we wouldn't harm anything, that we wouldn't take anything. We were just going to go in and enjoy the breath and the beauty and their experience with them. One of the findings of my study is that trees want to collaborate with humans to bring the environment and climate back into balance. While filming and communicating with longtime tree whisperer Jim Conroy and a very old ash tree, I asked the ash if it has any message for people of the world in terms of how we are as a human species. Conroy translated the internal image he received from the ash as, "It's almost like a choking person." Then he spoke the words he received from the ash. That's the way it's getting to be for us, because we're big and we need to breathe too. Beings of nature are very stressed, and they need lots of help right now. End quote from the ash. The last story I'll share pertains to Big Lonely Doug, a Douglas fir 66 meters tall and approximately 1,000 years old on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. If you follow the little arrow on the right, you'll see the person standing at the base of the tree so you can compare their heights. I finished reading this book late one night with the intention of returning to it later to attempt to tune into Big Lonely Doug, or BLD, via the bioenergy fields that transcend the here and now. As I put the book down, I was surprised to feel BLD pushing into my field of awareness. I resisted this because the timing was not right for me. I had to go to bed. But my resistance was short-lived before a gush of communications came forth that I raced to keep up with in my notebook. I experienced BLD's communiques somatically in the forms of inner spoken language, sound, and bodily sensations as BLD initiated information and responded to questions from me. I was surprised by what BLD relayed, including that rather than lonely as BLD has been labeled, BLD feels embarrassed and exposed and has more care for its buddies and community lost than about the spotlight and attention it receives. BLD has survivor's guilt and feels, quote, stupid, wisdom for nothing, can't share it, no one listens, end quote. I also had the feeling in my own body of a sickening, high-pitched sound. We humans would perceive this clear cut as quiet in its visual emptiness. But what I got from BLD was that this emptiness produced a constant and horribly unbearable sound that had replaced the comforting sounds of life of BLD's former community. Understanding our individual ways of sensing and receiving in interspecies communication develops over time. Regular practice, patience, inner stillness, experience, and mindfulness, observation, and rigorous processes of discernment. Interspecies communication can be either a natural ability for some people, or for most others, it is a learned skill, an innate ability that lies dormant in all of us, Getson indicates. Either way, it is a discipline like yoga, meditation, playing a musical instrument, and dance. It is based in inner somatic language. There are people who communicate constantly with the vegetal world. I learned to do this, but I am often absorbed, like most of us, in the rush of doing that is central to left-brained, linear ways of being in capitalist, consumerist, technological, modern Western life. So it can be challenging to regularly attune to trees and plants. There are other somatic ways of connecting more deeply with the earth and all beings than solely the practice of interspecies communication. We can deepen our awareness of how our actions, emissions, and detritus affect the non-humans around us by thinking beyond the illusion of our individuated bubble of existence. For example, the way chemicals and microplastics enter the air, water systems, and eventually non-human bodies, from laundry detergent, dryer sheets, cleaning processes, medications, food, and hair dye, to name only a few. If you gag and feel like screaming as you walk by a neighbor's dryer vent, consider how this synthetic smell is received by airborne volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, by trees and plants, whose somatic ways of being transmit, receive, and absorb VOCs. As yoga instructor Adrian Mitchell repeats, where attention goes, energy flows. Where attention goes, energy flows. Which this corresponds with Nita's sentiment that attention becomes embodied reality. With attention, we become increasingly attuned to non-humans. This happened for me during my research, attuning myself to interconnections with trees and their communities and becoming increasingly sensitized to tree and non-human perspectives, needs, and rights became ever present and continually impacts the way I move in the world. Listening to Nita yesterday, I imagine that this awareness training can be absorbed in our intelligent fascia if it is not there already. As the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada indicates, Indigenous laws stress that humans must journey through life in conversation and negotiation with all creation. The Sentient Performativities Conference asks, can somatic modes offer new ways of thinking and being and invoke a heightened and active sense of ecological care? My answer is obviously a wholehearted yes. With ethics of care and mindfulness, we can communicate with vegetal worlds, collaborate with their awareness and intelligence, and move relationary for planetary stewardship, embodying our innate responsibility as humans. It seems to me the vegetal world is reaching out to us, perhaps more because of increases in human-caused environmental stress, and we Westerners are increasingly able to hear them. Knowing in our bodies that, as Martyr puts it, vegetal life is coextensive with a distinct subjectivity with which we might engage, and which engages us more frequently than we imagine. This is paradigm shifting and cannot help but deepen with the brackets, because this is in our history and this is the present for many people. It can help us deepen, reconnect, and reactivate eco-empathy and eco-relationships with beings beyond the human, and ultimately with ourselves, for humans, as humans are and of nature. So I'm going to finish my talk now. Thank you so much for all of your engagements with my sharing. You are welcome to reach out to me and check out my website. And I just do want to let people know that there are two opportunities on the website. One is a partially funded graduate master's MFA study opportunity on more than human connection through the University of Regina. And there's information there on that. And there's also information regarding a call for participation in a sound studies-based conference called Listening as Shared Social Practice, also being hosted through the University of Regina. So thank you so much, and I will come back to you with a live big self.
Sarah, thank you very much. Thank you so much for that wonderful and really quite almost poignant exploration of this kind of knowledge, which just seems to have, it feels like we haven't even really begun the conversation, in the sense that we were talking to someone earlier about Descartes, and in many ways Cartesian enlightenment was a wonderful thing, but of course it's been challenged many times. I think where it hasn't been challenged enough is its complete embrace of the ascendancy of the human at the cost of any other kind of knowledge. And it feels like we are just beginning to understand. We don't even know what we don't know. We don't really have a sense of where our knowledge, where to look for these questions, and I think your work is very much exploring that. And we don't have very long for questions, but I did want to ask you a question about the mycorrhizome and where you think that form of communication fits within all of this.
Yeah, okay, first I just actually want to respond to what you initially said, and I think it's really important for us in the West to really understand that our ancestry, it was in kinship, and it began to split because of the quote unquote good ideas of Plato and Aristotle and rational mind. And as we know, certainly in that context, animals and plants and other non-humans are not rational. And in that context, some people are more rational than others. And so this has been going on for, a couple of millennia. And I think Nita also nicely brought in the ways over time we have become separate and individuated, and therefore easily manipulated away from understanding our deep relationship with the earth, and knowing that we are of the earth. And I'm sorry that I can't remember the source, but somebody nicely wrote that we are minerals with agency. So good. We are, from David Crow, digestion is the release of solar energy inside our bodies. So going back to the mycorrhizal connections, to me, that really just speaks to the mind-blowingness. And it's mind-blowing because we've just been so encouraged to look away from the intelligence of trees. And, they look sort of still to us unless they're moving in the wind, but there is so much going on. I'm in a massive tree, to move water up and down that trunk to the in and out of the leaves, which are so far away. I mean, if you think of the base of the tree named Big Lonely Doug, and how 66 meters and more to the tips of the needles, that is a massive distance. And we're not even talking about, the roots, which must be incredibly extensive. And we do, through Suzanne Simard's work, we know that tree species will support their own species as well as other species. She's also has been indicating that trees seem to be acclimatizing to temperature rises. And also poignantly, there's those big trees are like mother trees, father trees. They support, they offer guidance to the younger trees. And when those big trees are taken down, all of us on the planet lose all of that experiential knowledge that the tree has gained and can pass on. And,
I think, sorry to interrupt. I think the one thing that we maybe possibly accept the concept of collaboration, but the notion of altruism has been so long thought of as a human trait. And of course, we know now that it's far from that. Just lots of thank yous and comments in the chat, and one particular request that from Viveka, who would love to see a bibliography that attaches to your work. I don't know if you've got anything you'd be willing to share, and which we'd be happy to put up on our website. Okay, yeah, I will. Thank you for the question and the request. I will actually write that up and send it to you, and you can post it. The reference section is just too big for a slide. So no, of course, absolutely. But if you're willing to share it, that's wonderful. And sadly, I'm going to call the session to a halt.
Okay.
We've pretty much had our time, and I did need to try and do a little bit of catching up on time. We did have a request from Sherry Sampson from Missouri, who would like to know if your thesis is available anywhere.
Yes, thank you for that question. I actually did mean to say that my thesis is publicly available. You can find it on my website. And there's also a journal article published in Qualitative Inquiry that is there, and some links to other writing. And you can contact me if you need anything specific that is not publicly available. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you and to everyone else.